All right, very good. Are we somewhere on schedule? Hi, thanks. Well, a full room of people. My name is Bram Wesselo, and currently we're doing a project within the Leiden University Medical Center of getting ready for FHIR. And I want to share you what our approach is. So I'm just going to tell you what we are doing. Maybe it's not the best way we are doing things, so if you don't have any questions for me, I'm going to ask you questions. So first, some brief overview of our project, because our project actually didn't start by wanting to do something with FHIR. Most of the people in our medical center, although it's an academic center, will glaze at you if you say, well, we actually need some API, and we'll want to base it on HL7 FHIR. They say, what is an API? So our whole project started from a very different angle. We had a couple of data warehouses, and they had all kinds of layers of software on top, built or produced over, well, a decade, I think. So it was very hard to change anything in these data warehouses. And the main goal was to shorten the time to develop data products. So all kinds of data products for medical research, for business intelligence, and it was not uncommon to that a request would take like 6 months to complete. So they said, well, we have these existing data warehouses and we need a new one. So let's migrate, and while doing that, we thought, well, let's adopt in that project, let's adopt the FHIR data model and become FHIR ready in that way. What was new is that, well, obviously we had to support business intelligence use cases. So let's say dashboards, graphs, how am I doing, how many patients, how many employees do I have. Medical research, so just being able to give data sets to researchers. But the new thing was to also support the primary caregiver. So we're now doing a couple of use cases where we say we are supplying data to a multidisciplinary team of caregivers, and they see data coming from all kinds of data sources combined, and then they give some judgment on, well, this should be the care plan for the patient. So that's really a medical decision that is being made. We started a couple of months ago, and we're currently working on it with 12 guys and girls, also from the FHIR team. And this is what it looks. So this is what we thought is the best sort of setup to being able to shorten the time to produce data products, and also support FHIR in the end. So what you see here is that we have a couple of sources. You see it's EHR. Our ICU unit has a different EHR, so the list is longer. Of course, a PACS and the ERP system. So for those that don't know what it is, it's enterprise resource planning. It contains finance stuff and HRM stuff, and maybe some procurement stuff. Well, and we also use that because that's what we need for the business intelligence use cases. These guys, they all lack, or they have some APIs, but not much. So we make. Primarily, we have a contact via the database connection, and then we store one copy of the data, mainly because of performance reasons, but we also keep track of the history. So if something is being updated, and then of course the version of before the update is not being retained, and we want to be able to go back in time, so to have some kind of auditing. What happened in the last couple of days? The next part is the virtual data warehouse. So after one copy, we do everything like within logic or so to say virtual. So we don't store the data again. That's purely because this data store you can check if you're still complete, if you have the same numbers on the left and the right hand side, and if you materialize the data again, then it's becoming harder and harder to being able to assess if you are still in sync with your original sources. So we thought, well, we have to wrangle the data into one data model, because that's basically what you do if you're building a data warehouse system. I hope that I don't offend data warehouse guys at the moment, but that's, I think, the biggest part of the game. And we chose to adopt the FHIR data model. I mean, otherwise we have to think up our own data model, so why not take one that's already there? And especially focused on the Dutch healthcare information models. For the Dutch guys here, it's called ZIPs, or the Zorginformatiebouwstenen, but anyway, so that's the primary model that we're modeling the data to. And I'm going to take you step by step through this model, because I'm just going to tell you what kind of decisions did we make. So some source databases, there we really had some need for near real-time data, because if you are basing your decisions for patients on it, then you want the latest data. You don't want to, for now, the old data warehouses, they refresh the data once a week. So that's by far not fast enough. So we had to enable change data capture. That's I think an off-the-shelf function within Microsoft SQL Server, and we had to enable that on a couple of systems. We didn't enable it on the ERP system, because the financial data and the HR data, it doesn't matter if it's a day old or maybe even if it's a week old. Some controllers even don't want it to change during a month, so once a month would be enough. But the EHR system and the parks need to be really up to date. And this step took us a long time. Nearly, I think the total project was like nearly a year before we got them all the DBAers, we got them convinced to turn it on, that the performance wasn't going to impact our system, or the performance, what is it? It will take some performance penalty when you put on change data capture, but very technical, and was so hard to enable. Now we're getting where we have a sort of control of the databases. So what we do is we need to make, of course, an initial copy of the tables that we need for the use cases that we support, and then we incrementally load that every 5 minutes. So we get the increments. Of course, the ERP system is loaded, I think, daily now, but that's we could speed that up if there's a need for it. And we use also an out-of-the-box thing, temporal tables, to keep track of history. So we have always a set of the current state of the table like it's in the source database, but there's a history table attached where former updates or inserts and at what time they occurred are also there. So we can basically travel back in time. Some of the tables are in this step being sort of post-processed. So if you have a table that contains like big XMLs and you have to parse those XMLs, we do that at this step. So we have then the raw data that contains the XML strings, but also parse it along the way. So then we have a split, for instance, split measurements. Moving on to the right. This is, I think, where most of the work is, the virtual data warehouse. And this is the phase where we also, at the moment, are in our project. So the data store, or as we call it, is a historical staging, but I don't know if that's rings a lot of bells, but that's sort of finished. But the virtual data warehouse is where we have where we are working at the moment, and what we do there is mapping of course, the source fields to FHIR elements. So we have a patient table and a patient name, and the name has to go there in the FHIR profile. So we make a lot of views, database views that look exactly like the FHIR resources. So that's what we're doing here. And of course, there's data in the source systems that needs to be mapped to the data sets that the FHIR resources or the profiles prescribe. So we have our own list of lab procedures, and we have to map those to loin codes. Yeah, so that's the second thing that we're doing. And of course we chose for the FHIR data model, but we need to also say something about, well, how many employees do we have, and that just doesn't fit into the FHIR data model. So somehow we have to add some extra resources and fit it in nicely with the rest, with the core FHIR data model. Of course, then you need to validate. You need to validate, did we make the right mappings? Did we make the right, well, concept maps, I think it's called. Those need to be monitored, of course, also by clinicians. And we do continuous checks. How many patients are there in the EHR, and how many do we have? If we have some kind of a concept map, so mapping the EHR values to loin codes, did they expand? Did they added another value that we now need to get into our concept map? So a lot of checks that are daily or even every 5 minutes that we also do. And as you can imagine, if you store the data only once, and you have a lot of views also stacked upon each other, which have all kinds of joins, unions, groupings, and whatnot. If you then ask from a use case perspective, you ask for some kind of data you want it to perform. So also there's some performance tuning, and at some point we thought, well, maybe we should materialize after the virtual data warehouse, materialize it again. But so we think that we don't need it, but we might in the coming year change our mind and say, well, we need some kind of a store over there. It might be a Firestore, but we don't know at this moment. So now moving on. So this is where we are at the moment, and the coming months we're going also to work on the FHIR facade. So that's a layer on top. And it's not always used, as you can see. The business intelligence stuff is just fine by taking data from the virtual data warehouse. They're not going to talk FHIR. There's no need for that, let alone that some business intelligence stuff doesn't even fit in the FHIR model. So it doesn't make sense to require that everything uses FHIR. But the rest, I think we can just map one-to-one to the FHIR API. So that's hopefully. I don't know what we're what problems we do have to tackle in the next coming months. And of course, we thought of, well, for instance, for care use cases, and to elaborate on that, care use case may be the personal health record system, or some kind of an e-health app, or maybe other care providers that talk FHIR to us, or a CDS hook, like the presentation that Josh Mendel just gave. So all kinds of things, and we also have to store those results. And we thought, well, we might just, if we get things back, then we store it again in our data store and then pass it through our virtual data warehouse. We don't know if it's going to work like that. In theory, it should be possible. We'll see. Maybe we can tell you next year. And some of that stuff also needs to be ported back to the EHR. So I'm not sure how we're going to do that. Maybe we might need another shift to or transfer it back to HL7 version 2 kind of messages, but I know that don't know. The implications of this whole setup is that, for instance, the FHIR subscriptions are very hard. I mean, when people when for instance care in e-health app sends data back, then we can trigger the subscription method. But of course, if we get data, we load data from the EHR this way, then there's no way of knowing, for instance, that a patient record, the patient data about the patient itself changed. So that's hard. And then we're still thinking about, well, what about authorization? How can you authorize scientific research for a cohort of patients and only having these research types, but maybe if you have the research type questionnaire response, then you don't want to give all the questionnaire response that a patient has in its whole life to the researcher, but maybe only several of those. So we need a fine-grained way of authorizing access, let alone how to deal with consents and so. So those things we are still working on. And I think, well, we came to the right part of the architecture. So how do you think we're doing? Anybody? Or do you have questions? Because I've got a mic. Well, no questions, then I would like to thank you for your attention and grab some lunch.